Today's lecture will cover Chapter 3, Communicating in a World of Diversity. Our learning objectives for today are to discuss the opportunities and challenges of intercultural communication. We'll define culture, explain how it's learned, and define ethnocentrism and stereotyping. We'll explain the importance of recognizing cultural variations and list 8 categories of cultural differences. We'll list 4 general guidelines for adapting to any business culture, and we'll identify 7 steps you can take to improve your intercultural communication skills. Intercultural communication is defined as the process of sending and receiving messages between people whose cultural background could lead them to interpret verbal messages and nonverbal cues differently. Every attempt to send and receive messages is influenced by culture, so to communicate successfully, you will need to have a basic grasp of cultural differences you may encounter and how you might handle them. The chances are good you'll be working across international borders at some point in your career. U.S. businesses depend on exports for significant portions of their revenue. Domestic markets are open worldwide as businesses of all sizes look for new growth opportunities outside their own countries. Every year, these companies export hundreds of billions of dollars worth of materials and merchandise, along with billions more in personal and professional services. If you work in one of these companies who provide any of these types of products and services, you'll need to communicate with a variety of people who speak languages other than English and who live in cultures quite different from what you and I are used to. Even if you've never visited another country or transact business on a global scale, you'll interact with colleagues from a variety of cultures with a wide range of characteristics and life experiences. Over the past few decades, many innovative companies have changed the way they approach diversity, from seeing it as a legal requirement to seeing it as a strategic opportunity. Smart business leaders recognize the competitive advantages of a workforce that offers a broader spectrum of viewpoints and ideas, help companies understand and identify with diverse markets, and enables companies to benefit from a wider range of employee talents. Today's increasingly diverse workforce encompasses a wide range of skills, traditions, backgrounds, experiences, outlooks, and attitudes toward work, all of which can affect employee behavior on the job. Intercultural communication is much more complicated than simply matching language between senders and receivers. The meaning of words, the significance of gestures, the rules of human relationships, these and many other aspects of communication are defined by culture. Elements of human diversity can affect communication at every stage of the communication process. In particular, your instinct is to encode your message using the assumptions of your culture. However, members of your audience decode your message according to the assumptions of their culture. The greater the difference between cultures, the greater the chance for misunderstanding. The next section will look at developing cultural competencies. Cultural competency is defined as involving appreciating cultural differences that affect communication. It also involves the ability to adjust one's communication style to ensure the efforts to send and receive messages across cultural boundaries are successful. In other words, it requires a combination of attitude, knowledge, and skills. The good news is that you're already an expert in the culture in which you grow up. You understand how your society works, how people are expected to communicate, the meanings of common gestures and facial expressions, and so on. The bad news is that because you're such an expert in your own culture, your communication is largely automatic. In other words, you rarely stop to think about the communication rules you're following. An important step towards successful intercultural communication is becoming more aware of these rules and how they influence your communication. Culture can be defined as a shared system of beliefs, symbols, attitudes, values, expectations, and norms of behavior. Members of a given culture tend to have similar assumptions about how people should think, behave, and communicate. Furthermore, they all tend to act on those assumptions in much the same way. As you grow up in a culture, you're taught who you are and how best to function in the culture that you belong to. Since you're often unaware of the influence of your own culture, your actions and reactions are essentially automatic. In addition to being automatic, established cultures tend to be coherent. That is, they're fairly logical and consistent throughout. Cultures also tend to be complete. They provide most of their members with most of the answers to life's big questions. Given the automatic influence of culture, people often conclude that their own culture or group is superior to other groups or cultures, which is ethnocentrism, is defined as the tendency to judge all other groups according to your own group standards, behaviors, and customs. An even more extreme reaction is xenophobia, which is a fear of strangers and foreigners. Clearly, business people who take these views will not interpret messages from other cultures correctly. Neither are they likely to send messages successfully. Stereotyping involves ascribing a wide range of generalized attributes to an individual on the basis of his or her membership in a particular culture or social group, without considering the individual's unique characters. While ethnocentrism and xenophobia represent negative views of everyone in particular, stereotyping is more a matter of oversimplifying and failing to acknowledge individuality. Cultural pluralism is the practice of accepting multiple cultures on their own terms. To show respect for other people and to communicate effectively in business, we'll all need to do the following. Number one, avoid assumptions. Don't assume that others will act the same way you do, operate from the same assumptions, or use language and symbols the same way you do. Avoid judgments. When people act differently, don't conclude that they're in error, that their way is invalid, or that their customs are inferior to your own. Lastly, acknowledge distinctions. Don't ignore differences between another person's culture and your own. In the next section, we'll cover recognizing variations in a diverse world. You don't need to become an expert in the detail of every culture in which you do business, but you will need to attain a basic level of cultural proficiency to ensure successful communication. You can start by recognizing and accommodating the following differences: cultural context, legal and ethical views, social customs, nonverbal signs, age, gender, religion, and abilities. All of these differences are covered in this section. Every attempt at communicating occurs within a cultural context, which is the mixture of traditions, expectations, and unwritten social rules that help convey meanings between members of the same culture. Cultures vary widely in the roles that context plays in communication. For example, in a high-context culture, people rely less on the explicit content of the message and more on the context of nonverbal actions and environmental settings to convey meaning. In such cultures, as individuals grow up, they learn how to recognize situational cues, such as gestures and tone of voice, and how to respond as expected. Also in high-context cultures, the primary role of communication is also often building relationships and not exchanging information. In a low-context culture, people rely more on the explicit content of the message and less on the circumstances and cues to convey meaning. In other words, more of the conveyed meaning is encoded into the message itself. The different expectations of low and high-context cultures can create friction and misunderstanding when people try to communicate across cultural boundaries. Cultural context also influences legal and ethical behavior, which in turn can affect communication. As you conduct business across the world, you'll find that both legal systems and ethical standards differ from culture to culture. Therefore, try to make ethical choices across cultures that can seem complicated, but you can keep your message ethical by applying 4 basic principles. Number 1, actively seek mutual ground. Number 2, send and receive messages without judgment. Number 3, send messages that are honest. And number 4, show respect for cultural differences. Social behavior is guided by formal and informal rules that influence the overall behavior of most people in society most of the time. Attitudes toward work and success. In the United States, for instance, a widespread view is that material comfort earned by individual effort is a sign of superiority and that people who work hard are better than those who don't. Roles and status influence. Cultural influences the roles that people play, including who communicates with whom, what they communicate, and in what way. The use of manners. What is polite in one culture may be rude in another. Concept of time. People in low context cultures see time as a way to plan the business day efficiently, viewing time as a limited resource. However, executives from high context cultures often see the efficient use of time as being less important than building business relationships. Future orientation. Successful companies tend to have a strong future orientation, planning for and investing in the future, but national cultures around the world vary widely in this viewpoint. Openness and inclusiveness. Cultures vary on how open they are to accepting people from other cultures or those who don't fit in the prevailing norms within the culture. An unwillingness to accommodate others can range from outright exclusion to subtle pressures to conform to majority expectations. Nonverbal communication can be a reliable guide to determining the meaning of the message, but this situation holds true only if the sender and receiver assign the same meaning to nonverbal signals. For example, greetings. Do people shake hands, bow, or kiss lightly on one side of the face or both? Personal space. When people are conversing, do they stand closer together or farther away than you're accustomed to? Touching. Do people touch each other on the arm to emphasize the point or slap each other on the back to show congratulations, or do they avoid touching? Facial expressions. Do people shake their heads to indicate no and nod to indicate yes? This is typical in the United States, but it's not universal. Another example is eye contact. Do people make frequent eye contact or avoid it? Frequent eye contact is a sign of honesty and openness in the United States, but in other cultures it can be a sign of aggressiveness or disrespect. Posture. Do people slouch and relax in the office and in public, or do they sit up and stand up straight? Or how about formality? In general, does the culture seem more or less formal than yours? In some cultures, youth is associated with strength, energy, possibilities, freedom. However, age is associated with declining powers and a loss of respect for authority. In contrast, in cultures that value age and seniority, longevity earns respect and increasing power and freedom. The perception of men and women in business varies from culture to culture, and these differences can affect communication and efforts as well. In some cultures, men hold most of all positions of authority and women are expected to play a more subservient role. However, as more women take on positions of greater responsibility, enlightened company leaders are making a point to examine past assumptions and practices. Religion in the workplace is a complex and contentious issue. As one of the most personal and influential aspects of life, religion brings potential for controversy in any work setting, as evidenced by a significant rise in the number of religious discrimination lawsuits. Some employees feel they should be able to express their beliefs in the workplace, but companies try to avoid situations in which openly expressed religious differences cause friction between employees or distract them from their responsibilities. As more companies work to establish inclusive workplaces, you can expect to see this issue being discussed at many companies in the coming years. Colleagues and customers with disabilities that affect communication represent an important aspect of diversity. People whose hearing, vision, cognitive ability, or physical ability is impaired can be a significant disadvantage in today's workplace. There is assistive technologies that help people with disabilities perform that might otherwise be difficult or impossible. In the next section, we'll cover adapting to other business cultures. Whether you're trying to work productively with members of another generation in your office or with a business partner on the other side of the world, adapting your approach is essential to communication success. This section, we offer general advice on adapting to any business culture and specific advice for professionals from other cultures on adapting to U.S. culture. 4 general guidelines can help all business communicators improve their cultural competency. First is to become aware of your own biases. Successful intercultural communication requires more than just understanding of the other party's culture. You need to understand your own culture and the way it shapes your communication habits. Ignore the golden rule. You probably heard this growing up: treat people the way you want to be treated. The problem with the golden rule is that it assumes other people want to be treated the same way that you want to be treated. This isn't always the case, particularly across cultural boundaries. The best approach is to treat people the way they want to be treated. Always exercise tolerance, flexibility, and respect. As IBM's Ron Glover put it, to the greatest extent possible, we try to manage our people and our practices in ways that are respectful of the core principles of any given country, organization, or culture. Also, practice patience and maintain a sense of humor. Even the most committed and attuned business professionals can make mistakes during intercultural communication, so it's vital for all parties to be patient with one another. A sense of humor is a helpful asset as well, allowing people to move past awkward and embarrassing moments. For those who are recent immigrants to the United States or grew up in a culture outside the U.S., practicing individualism, understanding that the U.S. culture expects individuals to succeed by their own efforts and it rewards individual success will be helpful. Also, U.S. culture values equality to a greater degree than most other cultures. U.S. culture values privacy and personal space, and we in the United States are accustomed to a fair amount of privacy that includes our personal workspace in the workplace. We value time and schedules. Businessmen and businesswomen value punctuality and the efficient use of time. For instance, meetings are expected to start and end at a designated time. In the U.S. culture, U.S. culture does not have an official religion. Many different religions are practiced throughout the country, and people are expected to respect each other's beliefs. And communication style in the U.S. tends to be direct and focused on content and transactions, not relationships or group harmony. The next section will cover improving intercultural communication skills. The better you are at intercultural communication, the more successful you'll be in today's business environment. However, communicating successfully from one culture to another requires a variety of skills. You can improve your intercultural skills throughout your career. Begin now by studying other cultures and languages, respecting preferences for communication styles, learning to write and speak clearly, listening carefully, knowing when to use interpreters and translators, and helping others adapt to your culture. Effectively adapting your communication efforts to another culture requires not only knowledge about the culture, but also both the ability and the motivation to change your personal habits as needed. Fortunately, you don't need to learn about the whole world at once. There are numerous websites and books that offer advice on traveling to and working in specific cultures. Try to sample newspapers, magazines, and even the music and movies of another country. As commerce continues to globalize, the demand for multilingual communicators also continues to grow. The ability to communicate in more than one language can make you a more competitive job candidate and open up a wider variety of career opportunities. Communication style, including level of directness, the degree of formality, media preferences, and other factors, varies widely from culture to culture. Knowing what your communication partners expect can help you adapt to their particular styles. Once again, watching and learning are the best ways to improve your skills. Writing clearly is always important, of course, but it's essential when you're writing to people whose first language is not English. Choose your words carefully. Be brief, using simple sentences and short paragraphs. Use plenty of transitions. Address international correspondence properly. Cite numbers and dates carefully. Always avoid slang, idiomatic phrases, and business jargon. Avoid humor and other references to popular culture. and meet the expectations of your audience, as we've discussed prior. Languages vary considerably in the significance of tone, pitch, speed, and volume. To ensure successful conversations between parties who speak different languages, both speakers and listeners need to make accommodations. Always speak slowly and clearly. Don't rephrase until it's obviously necessary. Look for and ask for feedback to make sure your message is getting through. Don't talk down to the other person by over-enunciating words or oversimplifying sentences. And at the end of a conversation, double check to make sure you and the listener agree on what's been said and decided. Any momentary awkward you might feel in asking for extra help is less important than the risk of unsuccessful communication. You may encounter business situations that require using an interpreter, which is for spoken communication, or a translator for written communication. The time and cost required for professional translation has encouraged the development of machine translation, which is any form of computerized intelligence used to translate one language or another. Although none of these tools can promise translation quality on a par of human translators, they can be quite useful with individual words and short phrases, and they provide the overall gist of a message. Everyone can contribute to successful intercultural communication. You can take steps to simplify the communication process. For example, oral communication in a second language is usually more difficult than written forms. So instead of asking a foreign colleague to provide information in a conference call, you could ask for a written response instead of or in addition to the live conversation. This concludes our review of Chapter 3, and we've discussed the following learning objectives. We looked at opportunities and challenges of intercultural communication. We defined culture, explained how it's learned, and defined ethnocentrism and stereotyping. We explained the importance of recognizing cultural variations and listed 8 categories of cultural differences. We talked about 4 general guidelines of adapting to any business culture, and we identified 7 steps you can take to improve your intercultural communication skills.